This is a video demonstration of using API Builder Standalone to go from 0 to a Dockerized microservice in hopefully under 15 minutes. Great place to get started on API Builder Standalone is the Appcelerator blog at appcelerator.com/blog. And there's a blog post called Amplify API Builder Standalone is here from Shravanti Reddy. It's an excellent blog post, and it introduces API Builder Standalone, talks about how to get started, and has some great references to documentation, video demos, data sheets, etc. So we're going to, in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to install API Builder Standalone on my machine. I'm going to create a new API Builder project and test it in the console. Then I am going to install the API Builder MongoDB connector so I can create some APIs to a MongoDB instance that's sitting up in MongoDB Atlas and in Amazon Web Service. Then I'm going to demonstrate how I can pass in environment variables to my API Builder runtime so I don't have to hard code things like my MongoDB instance password in my API Builder configuration file. And then finally, when all that is working and I'm able to make API calls against MongoDB, then I'm going to show how to containerize that API Builder project. So let's jump over to the API Builder Standalone Getting Started guide, again available at axway.com or docs.axway.com. And you can see the first thing is installing API Builder Standalone. So let me copy that. Let me bring up a terminal. I'm sitting on my, let me make sure I'm on my desktop. That's where I want to be for this demo. And let me do a sudo and then paste that in. And this will install API Builder Standalone on my machine, which is actually already installed. Okay, there you go. And the next thing I want to do is create a new API Builder project. So API-Builder is the command line, which is just installed, and init looks to be the command. Then I need to give it my project name. So I will call it LB Demo API. And that project was created here. And you can see the next steps are to change directory into that folder, install the dependencies using this command, and then do npm start to run. So let me do this. Oh, I forgot to go into that folder. All right, and now let me do that. Okay, so when I ran npm install on my desktop, I ended up with this file. Let me get rid of that. Okay, the next thing I could do is npm start to start my project. So let me do that. So now my default API Builder project is running. Let me copy this URL, which will give me access to the console for my project and allow me to administer the project and actually build APIs. There you have it. So I'm in the console. Here are the APIs. So we have a couple of default APIs as part of the base project. Here are the models, configurations, and then the connections. All right. So I now installed API Builder Standalone, and I created my first project. What I want to do is I do want to make some edits to the configuration file, really just for demonstration purposes. So let me go into here. And what I want to do is I want to just have null authentication, because eventually I'm going to virtualize these APIs in the API Gateway and API Manager, and that's where I will apply my security. And also for development purposes, I want to allow any host to run the administration console. So let me clear this to allow all connections. Oh, and let me save that. And that will cause my server to restart. So what I want to do now is I want to install a MongoDB connector. So if I come over here and I look at the API Builder connectors section of the online documentation, you can see that the connectors that currently are available for API Builder Standalone are MongoDB, MySQL, and Oracle. And what I will do is I will copy this to install the MySQL, and I will just replace MySQL with Mongo. That looks to be the syntax. So I have to start my project, Control C. Let me just do Mongo. Okay, so now the MongoDB connector is installed. Now, if I try to run my project, what'll happen is it'll fail because I haven't configured. API Builder doesn't know where my MongoDB instance is. So speaking of that, I'm using MongoDB Atlas, and you can go to MongoDB.com and search for Atlas and sign up. You can get a free instance. They can host it, I think, anywhere. This happens to be hosted on AWS. And I've got a single project, and if I go in there, I know this is my MongoDB instance that I want to connect to. And what I'll do is I will grab the connection string. So I clicked on the connect button. I want to connect my application, and I could select either of these. I'll use driver 3.6 or later, and I will copy that. Now, what's inside my MongoDB database? I'll use the MongoDB Compass Community utility. So it's an application running on my Mac that allows me to look at my my MongoDB databases, and I'm connected to my database, and I can see I've got an admin, a local, and a test01 database in my MongoDB instance. And if I look in test01, I've got one collection. So this would be equivalent to a table in a database. And if I click on that, I can see there's 5 documents or 5 records. And this happens to be a very simple record. It's just a dog, a name and a breed. So I've got Fido, Fred, Frida, Harry, and Doobie. So I've got 5 dogs in my dog database. All right. So I want to come back to the console. I want to come onto I got to run my project. Now that won't work. So what I'll do is I will open the folder for my project, and I will go into the conf folder and bring up the MongoDB configuration file for API Builder. And there's really just a few parameters that need to be set. Obviously, the URL needs to be set. So let me do that. Now, it assumes the name of the database is test. We know that mine is, it is actually test01. Okay, so test01. And I also have to replace my password. I'll do that in a minute. Now, there's a couple parameters here. Generate model from schema is set to false. I want to set that to true. So what that will do is for all the collections, it will make models for each collection. And then for each model that it creates, or basically for all the collections, it will create APIs. So I'll set that to true. So that creates an API based on the model. That creates models based on the schema or collections. So what I'll do is I'll type in my password, save this, and run the project. So it was npm start. Okay, so there it's running. If I come over here and click refresh, I could see here from an API standpoint, I've got mongo/dog. So let's also look at the models. You can see the dog model. If I click on that, you can see it's got a breed and a name. And I've also got, obviously, configuration file, and I'm using the MongoDB connector. So if I come under APIs, go under MongoDog, you can see that API Builder, without writing a single line of code, exposed all these APIs to my dog collection. So if I come under Find All, here is the documentation for that. Here's the curl command, and I can also just execute this here in the browser. And here are my 5 documents or records from my table, really, collection called dog. So that was pretty easy. But the problem I've got now is that my password is hard-coded in my configuration file. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use some new features of API Builder to pass in an environment variable which is my password. All right, so let's come over here and let's open that configuration file again. And you can see my password in there. That's not good. So I want to get rid of that. And I'll use the $bracket syntax, and I will type in process.env. That's the environment variables for my node process. And I will make up an environment variable called mongo_pwd, and that's all uppercase. And that is it. No, the other thing that you need to be aware of with this feature of passing in environment variables is I need to replace my single quote with a backtick. That's an ES6 thing. So let me do that here as well. Save, and I am now done. And what I can do now is run this project. And this should work the same, except this should fail because I'm missing an environment variable. So we cannot connect to MongoDB. So to pass an environment variable, I'll just type the environment variable name, pass in my password. So this is done at the command line as opposed to hard-coded in my project. And now it will run. Okay, so if I come back over here, refresh, find all. So what we were able to achieve in this last step was to remove the hard coding of any variables like my password out of the configuration file and make that something that's passed in during build and run, etc. So that's great. So all that's left now is to Dockerize our API Builder project. So if I come back here to the online documentation and I come under How-Tos, you will see that there is a very nice guide for Dockerizing your API Builder project, and that's what we're going to do next. So, well, before I do that, let's come back to the console, and let's grab this. I don't have any API key, so I just need this. And let me run a curl command to run that same API, and I get the same results. If I come over here and cancel my quit my project so it's not running, this should fail. Okay, perfect. All right, so now I'm going to Dockerize that service. So I guess the first thing worth noting is now when you create an API Builder project, we provide a Docker file. It's a starting point. You might want to enhance it, but for the most part, it should be suitable for most of your projects. So I'm going to use the Docker build command. Now, of course, I have to have Docker running on my machine, and if you see here from the whale, I do have Docker installed, and it is running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here, and the command is Docker build and then the image name. So Docker build -t, and then I need the image name. And since my project is called LB Demo API, I'll just append image to that just for an image name. And I'll specify the location of the Docker file, and it's in the same folder. So // should be good enough. And you can see it's based on the Alpine distribution, which is very small, which is great. You can ignore those warnings. At least for the purpose of this demo. Okay, so that's great. Let's make sure that that image was created so I can do, well, let me clear. let me do a Docker image ls. So I can see here the Alpine as well as LB demo API image, which is based on that distribution of Alpine. So that's great. So the next thing I can do is create a container and run it locally on my machine. And the command to do that is docker run. Now I need to give that container a name, and I'll call it the same name as my project. I'll call it LB Demo API. And what I'd like to do is, if you recall, when I was making those API calls, API Builder by default was exposing those APIs on port 8080. So I'll use the -p command, and I'll map 8080 in my Docker container to 8080 on my host. And then I want to pass an environment variable, so I'll use a -e. And remember, the environment variable was mongo_pwd, and I got to put in my password. And then I will specify which image do I want to base this container on, and it's LB demo API image. And then it will run and display messages to the console, and there it is. So it's running. So if I come back over here, I can now clear this and make that API call, and there it is. There is my data. So I now created a Docker container. So if I do this, I can see my Docker container. It's called LB, well, it has this container ID. It's called LB Demo API, and it was created 16 seconds ago, up for 22 seconds. And there you have it. So we showed how to how to install API Builder Standalone, how to create a new project and test it, how to install a MongoDB connector to a MongoDB instance, specific database and collection in that instance, and automatically build APIs to my collection, and run those in the console. We also demonstrated how to pass in an environment variable, so I don't have to have things like passwords hard-coded in my API Builder project. And then finally, when all that was working and we were happy with our APIs, we saw how to use Docker to build a Docker container. So now I have a containerized microservice that I can run in my Docker infrastructure. Thank you.